At night sometimes, there's a flame over there that the whole sky is like burning. I mean, it looks like an inferno or something.
There's stuff coming up into my throat and my nose is shutting down and I can't get a breath.
Texas was a very poor agrarian state until oil was discovered. And I would suggest that in large measure our state government is both funded and controlled by this industry.
I can control what my kids eat, I can control what goes on their skin, but I can't control the air that's coming across from the neighbors.
Being 40 miles back on some ranch with nothing but a little indicator that says the H2S is present in the area, that stuff's so dangerous, it's 1,000 parts per million, you're dead.
The Eagle Ford Shale formation is about 400 miles long and about 50 miles wide. It's away from the big cities. It's not near population centers like Dallas, Fort Worth. So it's mostly rural. It is a generally poorer area of Texas. And for some reason, it has not gotten a lot of attention nationally.
It's also arguably the largest economic development area in the entire world right now. There are a lot of different companies operating there. There's an enormous amount of investment flowing into the Eagle Ford, and it's just been an absolute game changer.
There is a rush to some newly discovered oil fields in this country.
The Eagle Ford Shale in the district I represent has created over 400,000 jobs and roughly $2.6 billion in salaries in a 13-county area.
You have thousands of wells now in the Eagle Ford, and this boom has been going really strong for at least 2 years. But you don't have any state air monitors in the places where the drilling is really booming. And if you don't have air monitors, you don't know what's in the air.
I think air pollution associated with fracking, because it involves chemicals like hydrogen sulfide, because it involves carcinogens like benzene, could end up being a bigger public health threat than, let's say, contaminated groundwater. I think what they are saying in Texas, or the few who have spoken out, can we just slow it down a little bit and make sure that we're not poisoning people? Almost a year ago, I began traveling to South Texas to see for myself what's happening in the Eagle Ford. 7,000 oil and gas wells have been sunk in this region. Another 5,000 are on the way. This is Karnes County, the epicenter of the boom. New wells, relentless truck traffic, flares everywhere. The industry says all of this is safe, but some people are worried.
For myself, I've experienced a lot of difficulty with my breathing.
I used to come out here, this very park, before all that was there, and run literally about 4 or 5 miles a day without any problems. Now I barely get a mile out before I start choking. It's just something heavier with the air.
I have 2.5 acres, and I can't bring my grandchild out here to enjoy it because I'm afraid for his health.
For the past 8 months, Inside Climate News, the Weather Channel, and the Center for Public Integrity have investigated air pollution in this region. Oil and gas companies release thousands of tons of dangerous chemicals into the air each year. Those gases, which include benzene, carbon monoxide, and formaldehyde, soar into the sky. Then they land on schools, hospitals, and people's homes. People in the Eagle Ford say they're getting sick, and their symptoms match the kinds of problems caused by these chemicals. There's no scientific proof that their symptoms are caused by toxic air because the studies haven't been done. But as far as we can tell, regulators know almost nothing about what people in the Eagle Ford are breathing.
I've, had problems before with allergies, but these symptoms are different. What I had before were just mild breathing problems, and they were occurring maybe once a month when the allergens were high.
Lynn Buring and her husband were born in Karnes County. They moved to this house to enjoy the big skies and quiet nights outside.
Well, then suddenly this Eagle Ford to Shale stuff starts happening, and I noticed that there's stuff coming up into my throat, and my nose is shutting down, and there's this heaviness on my chest, and it feels like an elephant sitting here, and it feels like somebody's choking the air out of me, and I can't get a breath.
Lynn says her doctors blame her worsening asthma and her crippling migraines on the oil wells. It would be hard to say which well. More than 50 have been drilled within 2.5 miles of her home. Fred and Amber Lissy work a 564-acre, family-owned organic farm on the northern edge of the Eagle Ford. The Lissy family won't lease their land to an oil company, but that hasn't stopped their neighbors.
It just makes constant noise. They have bright lights on all night long, and that one was completed last summer, and it flared nonstop for a year.
We're standing on the road. We own that side of the road, and this is the neighbors where they're doing some massive frac job. Obviously, you can hear the noise. It's pretty loud. Sometimes it really echoes late at night, but that flame's almost always going. We don't feel safe having cattle or anything right here. If it did rain a whole bunch, or what kind of chemicals are coming off of this thing, we don't feel safe using this piece of land.
The chemicals released during oil and gas extraction include some of the most damaging volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, including benzene and toluene. These chemicals have been linked to cancer, neurological problems, and other serious illnesses. VOCs are released at every phase of oil and gas development: drilling, fracking, production, and processing. They're part of the fluid that's used to fracture the shale, and they're released from the earth when the rock is cracked open. VOCs seep from well bores, storage tanks, flares, and even pipelines. But oil fields in this part of Texas have an added danger: hydrogen sulfide. It's a naturally occurring gas you'll find in some shale areas of the country, but is especially abundant here. In low concentrations, it makes people sick. In high concentrations, it can kill.
We could smell, at times, hydrogen sulfide gas. We didn't know what it was at first. We could just smell rotten eggs. It was outside. Very strong, very saturated. Then we could smell chlorine at times. Then we smelled crude oil at times. We knew what that was. I went to those 3 rig sites where they were drilling, and I told them, "You're making us sick," literally.
Cynthia Dubnik is among the people who say they've gotten sick since the boom began. I decided to visit her.
This is a daily log of what we smell, if we can identify it. I will note on here its chemicals, and I will note if we have any side effects from it. And I'm doing it, and I'm going to continue doing this because I'm noticing we're gradually developing new symptoms off and on.
Cynthia lives in this small house where she cares for her disabled daughter.
My daughter has nosebleeds. I have sores in my nose at times, off and on, that don't want to heal correctly. There's something wrong about that picture, especially when we didn't have it before.
When she could no longer tolerate the air, Cynthia complained to the agency responsible for policing air polluters, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ. Since 2008, the number of wells in the Eagle Ford has skyrocketed, but the TCEQ has had its budget cut by 1/3. Hundreds of complaints have poured in over the past few years from Eagle Ford residents. We wanted to know what the TCEQ was doing about them. Over the course of 8 months, we made over a dozen interview requests. And for 8 months, the agency in charge of air emissions for hundreds of thousands of wells affecting millions of Texans refused even a telephone interview. The TCEQ did respond to us in an email. They told us, The air monitoring data evaluated to date indicate that air pollutants in the Eagle Ford Shale area have not been a concern either from a long-term or a short-term perspective. Therefore, we would not expect adverse health effects, adverse vegetative effects, or nuisance odors in this area.
They found this word, fracking, which sounds like something you wouldn't say to your grandmother.
We did speak with Steve Everly of Energy in Depth, a research and public relations arm of the Independent Petroleum Association of America.
The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality has actually gathered literally millions of data points on air emissions in the Eagle Ford region specifically, and they have come out and say that, on balance, Eagle Ford shale development is not resulting in emissions that are threatening public health or causing any sort of high levels of air pollution that are of concern.
We looked into what the TCEQ was monitoring. According to experts, not much. While the agency does sporadic spot monitoring, we were shocked to learn that there are only 5 permanent air monitors in the entire Eagle Ford. That's 5 air monitors for an area nearly twice the size of Massachusetts. Karnes County is at the heart of oil and gas drilling in the Eagle Ford. You're looking at the closest air monitor. It's more than 20 miles away.
A lot of these events are very fleeting. They can be very intense. There can be a really high exposure to something like hydrogen sulfide or benzene, and then it dissipates. It seems unlikely to me that this air monitor would pick that up.
The TCEQ knows there are problems. In this 2011 memo, the TCEQ acknowledges extensive records of underestimated or previously undetected emissions from oil and gas sites. These are not isolated instances, but have occurred statewide and indicate a pattern.
TCEQ is not a very good regulatory agency. In fact, if anything, it's the contrary. They specialize in making rules difficult and hoops difficult to jump through, but the fact of the matter is, when it's all said and done, time and time again, you see the violation of the law and no enforcement.
I previously to this position worked for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for 12 years inspecting industrial plants. So I got a very good bird's eye view going into refineries, chemical plants, power plants, gas processing plants, and more. But I also dealt with over 1,000 citizen complaints. I concluded that when citizens complained about air pollution, they were always right. There was a problem.
We've looked at actual data, and so have state regulators. And the consistent thing that we've seen is that there are emissions. There are emissions from development, and I think everyone would admit that. But the question is whether it's reaching a public health threshold and that would threaten public health. And the data have consistently shown that that threshold is not, that threshold's not being crossed.
The data haven't shown it because the data we need don't exist. We know very little about air quality in the places with the most drilling, places like Karnes County.
In the Eagle Ford, we know that there are hundreds of complaints of people who live near these facilities, and they're complaining of symptoms. A lot of them are symptoms that we associate with hydrogen sulfide or VOCs or other chemicals. Something like benzene, the effects don't show up until decades later. We know benzene causes leukemia, but do you really want to wait 30 years before seeing leukemia in a place before you consider that as scientific proof?
What's going on in the Eagle Ford Shale is more subtle than a refinery explosion or an oil spill. A toxic soup of chemicals is being released into the air day in and day out. We won't know the effects of these emissions for a very long time.
The chemicals in the air, we can't get away from them because we live here. We're here 24/7. We cannot get away from it. We don't have another home to go to.